Hi, friends. It's me, Lily, your friend who sews, and I thought I would come to you today with a pattern review of the Coquelicot skirt that I just recently finished up. So this is the pattern in question. It is the Coquelicot skirt from Wildflower Designs. It is a printed home pattern, and I chose to do the tile printout, which reminds me I need to show you guys my helpful hack because I have heard from so many people who absolutely find themselves stalled at printing and taping together a tiled pattern because of all the folding and getting everything lined up. And for them, it's just too much of a pain in the butt. You'll have to forgive me. This pattern piece was just taken out of its envelope that I stored in. So it's all still folded, but it gives you a really good idea of what I'm trying to talk about. So for a lot of these tiled pattern print on demands, when you print up your pattern, it comes the standard 8.5 by 11 sheet size. And there usually is a test square. So you definitely want to make sure that you do that because if your printer is going to try to scale it in some way or anything like that, that can actually throw off the pattern. So definitely print just that one page with the measure square and make sure that it is the accurate size before you print off your whole thing. Because the last thing you want to do is print, say, 20 to 30 pages and find out that none of it is sized correctly. That would really suck. Anyhow, your pattern tends to come like this, and much like this cover page, it'll typically have a border on it. And sometimes it'll say things like fold back this page edge or match this page edge to this page edge. Different brands have different ways of doing it. Now, Wildflower Designs, what they did is in those corners that you're supposed to match up by folding the paper in or cutting off the edges of the paper, it has circles that would then, so basically you get the corners to match up by completing the circles, which works great. There's all sorts of different ways that you can do it. I know that the charm patterns by Gertie, they have little squares. And so you match up the little squares to get those to work. But usually the instructions are to either cut or fold back the edges of the paper in order to make it work. And that's a lot of cutting. So my hack is it's actually really simple. Get your scissors, and what you're going to do is you're just going to cut off the corners right where the markings are. So you don't want to cut the corner off if you can, but basically you're going to cut the corners where the lines are. You're just going to cut off those corners. And then when it's time to put it all together, hope you can see here, you can see that how they're cut, how I cut the corners. Then all I have to do is get the corners to match up pretty darn close. And in this case, get the circle to match up. I didn't have to cut off any of these long edges. You can still see I've got the edge there. I just snip the corners. It makes it so much easier. There's so much less paper waste. It's quicker. It's a life changer for me. So I hope that helps. If anything, I might edit this part out and just make it a little snippet. So that hack aside, yes, I did the tile print and I put my pattern together. And the skirt that I made was this particular view from the outside, but I thought it would be fun to try my hand at the more historic lacing view, which is this right here on the inside. So that was the details of my make in regards to the pattern. Now for the pockets, I used some 100% cotton scrap that I had that would be really nice. And then for the actual body of the the body of the skirt, plus like the waistband, the ties, a couple of interior details, I used a 100% linen, kind of a more, it's a medium weight. To be honest, I don't know the exact weight of the linen. I bought it ages ago for more historical garment construction and really have no clue how heavy it is. But so overall thoughts. The pattern is well done, well constructed. Now, I was only using one size for the pattern, so I can't really say if the grading in one direction or another is particularly great or particularly poor. But in regards to the sizing as what was said in the pattern, and then ultimately what I got out of the garment, it seems great. Now, granted, this is a essentially a wrap skirt, so there is less fussiness in regards to the sizing. which personally I think is a benefit of this pattern because I'm someone who my weight tends to fluctuate up and down between, well, time of year, it can be as little as 5 pounds, sometimes it can be as many as 15 pounds. And having a skirt that I can wear year round without really worrying about is it going to feel too tight or too loose is always a benefit in my book. And so that was something that I really liked about the pattern. But again, then it's hard for me to tell whether or not like the sizing was spot on or anything like that. In regards to what they said they would deliver and what I got, I thought it was great. Let's see. The pattern itself was quite flattering, although admittedly, I have to say that because I used that lacing inside and then did more of the A line, I think it's technically a half circle skirt, half circle, maybe quarter circle. I'm getting mixed up. So but because it wasn't like a full skirt, there was a little bit of bulkiness in the front, and that makes absolute sense. So, any complaints that I would have about that are largely user error for deciding to use the pattern the way that I chose to, as opposed to using the pattern as it was written. So, I'm certainly not going to dock it for that. But if you decide that you want to go that same route, bear in mind that it might have a little bit of bulkiness depending on what kind of fabric that you use for those pieces. Let's see. So that's kind of my overall thoughts. I mean, I really liked the pattern. I will definitely make it again. It's just a matter of, you know, when I find the fabric that just calls to me for it. But I figured I'd also talk a little bit about what I would do differently. I think obviously one of them is that if I make the A-line view again, I'm not going to do the lace closure. I decided it'd be fun to kind of play around with. So that's mainly the reason why I did it. But it does have a really nice closure for view A here that uses D-rings. I suppose you could also use um, like hooks and eyes, or maybe if you had like an unobtrusive button, you could do something like that if you wanted to fuss with it. The pattern as written, though, is for D-rings, which again plays into the adjustability factor of the pattern. So that's certainly what I would do, is give that view a chance. Let's see. Additionally, what would I do? I thought that the ties were, for my needs, way too long. I understand the idea of it gives more visual interest because you don't just have like this tiny little, bow back or tied back or whatnot. But the ties were really long, and I don't know that I would necessarily keep all of that length for the ties if I were going to make it in the future, because it was definitely the length of the ties was not something that was necessary for the sizing so much as it was more of a stylistic choice. And personally, um, like where the ties are now, if I do a small bow, there's the potential that the ties are actually going to be longer than the hem of the skirt. And that's not a look that I like. So I tend to have to, really kind of pull out the loops of the bow in order to get it balanced just the way that I like. I'd really rather not fuss with that next time. So probably when I do make this again, if I do make this again, which is I probably will, I will shorten the ties. So that's something else. And then I decided to give hem facing a try. I have done multiple ways of hemming, and admittedly, when it comes to hemming circle skirts, it's not my favorite. Usually, my way of dealing with hemming a circle skirt is I honestly bias bind it. I'll either make bias tape from the actual fashion fabric, so there's really not much of a difference. Or if I want something interesting in a contrast, is I'll buy or make a contrasting bias binding, but I just find that so much easier. But this time I thought it would be interesting to try more of a hem facing because I wanted to use some more of that cotton scrap that had a bit more body to it in the hope that, similar to using like a horsehair braid to give structure to a hem, I thought it might be interesting to try a fabric that had a little bit more stiffness to it and do the hem facing that way. Um, it was certainly easier than doing a turned up hem because when you have to get all of the when you're taking extra length and you're putting it in a narrow space and you have to kind of fuss with it a bit. And there are tips and tricks for how to do that. So, please don't think that it's always fussy. There are experts out there, and maybe I'll do a video at some point showing you ways that you can kind of fuss with it and make it work pretty easily. Um, but using the facing was really simple construction wise. And I think it ultimately went together nicely. But when it all comes down to it, I probably won't do a hem facing again. Now, the maker of this pattern suggests doing a bias facing, like they basically get some contrasting fabric and they make a wide bias and then they, you know, iron it out to match the curve that's needed for the circle skirt, and then they use that as a facing. And that can work very well. I just didn't happen to have enough of my scrap fabric to make the amount of bias tape that I would need to do that. So I just did it more of a standard facing. So yeah, next time I probably will bias bind it or maybe use hem tape or something like that. But again, that's not a fault of the pattern at all. That was a choice that I made and just telling you how I would do things differently. But admittedly, it's kind of fun when I, twirl on the skirt and you can see a little bit of that contrasting fabric and the hem. I think it's kind of a neat detail. So final thoughts. I think this pattern is excellent for people who want more of a-line or a twirly skirt because you can definitely get that. It is the pattern's great because, like I said, you don't really have to fuss over the fit very much. There is more leeway because of the fact that it's kind of got those adjustable elements to it. So again, I personally thought that was great. So if you too have weight fluctuations or, for whatever reason you like having options that maybe some days you can wear it a little tighter and other days you can wear a little shorter, or not shorter, a little looser, this is definitely great for that. Um, if you are a fan of wrap skirts, one of the things that you might actually appreciate about this pattern is traditional wrap skirts. They tend to actually wrap um, and overlap, which is great, but sometimes that coverage can end up, less or too much. And if you've ever had a awkward experience with a errant breeze or a gust of wind and you feel a little exposed because some of that overlap starts to open, that's not something that you really have to worry about with this pattern because the overlap is actually at the sides, at the hips, and the pockets provide coverage. In fact, it's that overlap that you use to reach in order to access the pockets. So, for people who like the adjustability of a wrap skirt but are worried about the coverage or maybe the modesty or anything like that about a skirt that has an overlap, this you don't have to worry about that. So, that's a kind of nice feature. Additionally, I would say that the pattern isn't difficult. So if when it comes to actually constructing it, there was with the lacing element, there were a couple of areas that were a little fussy, but my recommendation for every pattern, no matter how experienced or inexperienced you are at sewing, is always read through the entire pattern before you ever even get started. Try to pinpoint areas where you think you might have trouble. Go to YouTube and see, like, if the trouble is you don't know how to install a lap zipper, or maybe it's been a few months and you're worried that you might forget a few details. Go to YouTube, see if there's a video of somebody doing the same thing. When you troubleshoot and find that. And there were a couple of areas with the lacing that I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to go and look up how to do it, but I just kind of knew that when the time came, read a couple of times, go through it, maybe kind of baste it in if I need to, those sorts of things to take my time to make sure that I got those little details right. But really, it's not a very difficult pattern. Most of the sewing is straight seams or gentle curves. If you've done rudimentary sewing, this should be a no-brainer of a pattern for you. But if it is more of if this is like your first time doing a skirt, or maybe you've just started sewing and the only thing that you've done is a pillowcase or something like that, don't be afraid to give this pattern a try. I just would suggest, though, find a mentor, try to make a connection with a friend or family member who maybe has a little bit more sewing experience. That way, then if you do need to, bounce some questions, you've got somebody already right there to help you so you don't get stuck to a point where you get too frustrated and give up entirely. Because it really isn't difficult. It's just there's a couple of little areas that for a beginner sewer could be kind of tricky. So other than that, that's pretty much what I have to say about the Coquelicot. Um, and all in all, I would definitely recommend it. So that's it. Those are my thoughts on the Coquelicot skirt. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to leave them below and we will chat again later. Bye. Get my pattern out. I'm gonna edit all this stuff out. It's probably crinkly and being loud. There we go. Man, this blooper reel is gonna be off the hook. Okay.